So, Danger Close has finally arrived in Global, and I'd like to talk about it. First, I'll talk about an overview of the whole mode, and then the rewards and the scoring system, and then I'll proceed to talk about general tips, and then finally we'll actually discuss the bosses that came to Global. Danger Close is a PvE mode in Counterside where you fight two bosses with two separate teams. So that means once you use a character in one of the bosses, you can't use them on the other boss. The same goes with equipment. Unless you reset your score, but that's also resetting your progress. Each boss has 3 stages, a level 80, a level 100, and finally a level 130. And finally, you only get 3 attempts per day. The rewards for this mode come in the form of Danger Close performance points. I'll just call them DC points from now on. They're mostly used in the shop to buy maze gear and hummingbird. Now you might be a bit nervous that you can't beat the final stage of the boss because it's a level 130. And while it is good to try to beat the last stage of the bosses, it's not necessary to get the currency. As you can see here, as long as your total point is 10.5k, you'll get 200 DC points. And just by arriving at the final stage, which is you beat the level 101, and you just started on the level 131, without doing a single point of damage to the boss, you're already at 5k per boss. And if you get it on both bosses, it's already 10k. So it's not that hard to get this 200 DC points. And as you can see here, as long as you're 90% of the player base when it ends, which is majority of the player base, you'll get an additional 85. So you get a nice bit of DC points just for participating. There's also these modifiers once you get to the final stage, where you can make it more difficult for you, or make it more easier, but that degrades your score. But there are modifiers that you can enable in order to make the fight more difficult, which in turn raises your score. I wouldn't fiddle around with this unless you're really confident and you have a plan. Lastly, pertaining to this, it can be tempting to say that, oh, you should never use awakened units in Danger Close because one of the modifiers is it nerfs awakened units. But honestly, it's only plus 10% score, and if using an awakened unit enables you to get a better score or maybe even beat the last stage of the boss, it's worth using. Also, the boss fights will have different combat environments. These will change from season to season, and they're different for each of the bosses. Usually one of them is a nerf and the other is a buff, but since we're all new, Counterside has decided to give us both buffs. So let's get to the general tips of Danger Close. General tips is kind of weird because team building becomes very specific to each boss, and they shuffle around the bosses a lot. And there's usually a group of units, like 2 or 3 units that are pretty much essential that will carry you through the fight. So instead, I'll talk about which ships are very good in a lot of the Danger Close bosses, and as well as the supports. In terms of ships, there's 2 groups, the damage ships and the debuff ships. Damage ships are composed of things like Enterprise and Kamizumi. For budget options, there's also Gleipnir and Stellar. And the debuff ships, the main one is New Detroit, but I doubt global players have New Detroit because it requires you to build New Ohio first. Fortunately, there's a budget option in Razangriff. Razangriff. And now for the supports. There are the buffers, and then there are the debuffers, which are defense shreds. The main buffers are Yang Harem, Soyun, the normal one, Shinjia, and Hilde, again, the normal one. And as for the debuffers or the defense shred ones, the ones we have in global are mainly Roy and Doma. But there's also Chifuyu and once again Soyun. But a lot of other supports will come in the future. So now let's actually talk about the bosses. Moderator Type-A and the Sollicitatio. So in the Mod A fight, there are two primary things that you want to keep in mind. One is that you need a melee unit or some sort of summon in melee range. That's because the boss will check right in front of him if there's a unit in melee range. And if you don't have anyone there, for 8 seconds, he'll fire a giant laser that damages all your units, including the ship. You can also use summons, such as Shinji's clone or Kyle's walls. But those strategies probably require CDR gear in order to be consistent. The second thing you need to remember is that the boss will initiate these DPS checks. You need enough units in the field in order to meet it, otherwise he fires the laser. If you're able to pass a DPS check, Mod A is vulnerable for a while. This is a good chance to use all your ultimates, and if you're using a defense down ship, this is a good time to use it. After which, Mod A will walk towards the center of the stage. You might have to redeploy your tanks so that they go in front of Mod A again in order to meet the melee check. The boss can also just walk into your backline and kill a bunch of your damage dealers, so you'll need to redeploy them. And at this point, it's mostly a DPS check. He does initiate the circle again, the DPS check circle. But yeah, at that point, it's just a race. Okay, moving on to Sollicitatio. Solli is a siege boss. That means she slowly walks towards your ship, and once she gets to your ship, she will just one-shot it. So because of this very specific thing, she requires a very specific unit, which is Gabriel. Gabriel is a tower that makes Sollicitatio stop and attack him instead. And then you can set up your damage dealers behind Gabriel. Sollicitatio then throws down these mines under your units. The most common way to deal with this is with Shion and with his counterattack. Normally, Shion needs some amount of CDR gear in order to have his special skill to counter all of the mines, but since the combat environment buff is Shion just having free skill haste, you don't need to worry about that this season. Her more advanced phases, when she teleports backwards, she'll then summon the sort of like vacuum that also damages your backline. Hopefully you have healers or shielders. However, if you ever get to a minute or a few seconds above a minute, she'll enter her board phase where she will just go straight for your ship, and at this point it's just a DPS check, and whenever she summons bombs, she summons the entire field with bombs. So that was the video. I hope this helped you, and thank you for watching.